On tonight's episode of Mr. Norris's In Case You Missed It, we look at the War of 1812. Why did it start? What were some of the big events? What were some of the noteworthy battles? What did it all mean? Hey, hi, hello, and what is up, everybody? It's your host, Mr. Norris, the history teacher with the good hair. And tonight we're going to be talking about the War of 1812. Fascinating topic. A war in American history that's not talked about maybe enough or a lot. But tonight we're going to dive all into it. Okay, so the War of 1812. Some interesting stuff here to start off with. It is the first time the United States officially declares war against another country. Yes, that is correct. Congress declares war in July, I believe, of 1812. Okay. Now, why are the reasons that we went to war against Great Britain in 1812? Well, I'll give you a couple. Number one, their practice of impressment. For years, Great Britain was involved in the Napoleonic Wars with France. And they also had a lot of sailors in the Royal Navy that were kind of deserting and heading to the newly found United States of America. And to cut down on that and to kind of get more sailors to help them fight their war against France, they began a practice called impressment. And basically what that is when the United States had trade ships that were traveling to other countries, they would stop them on the open seas, inspect the crew, and they would take sailors kind of at their own will and doing, and force them to serve in the British Navy in their, Napoleonic War or during the Napoleonic Wars against France. And that had been going on for quite some time. It's estimated actually that 15,000 sailors, or roughly around 15,000 sailors in that time period, were impressed. A lot of the sailors that they were taking were actually former British citizens. And they also kind of argued that just like everybody in the United States was a former British citizen, so they had the right to do this. But that was a big cause of the war. Another one, and I explained this kind of in one of my past videos on Tecumseh, was the fact that Great Britain was deemed to be aiding Tecumseh's Confederacy, which was the largest Native American revolt that our country's pretty much ever seen. And that takes place during Tecumseh's War in 1811. A lot of congressmen believe that Great Britain is supplying Tecumseh and his Confederacy with weapons to fight their war against the United States. So there's another reason. And then kind of the secret hush-hush reason is the fact that in Congress at the time, there were a lot of Democratic Republican senators from the South or the West who were called war hawks. And basically, these people envisioned the United States as a country where our main economy was going to be based in agriculture, having massive amounts of land, growing crops, and, basically running our economy all on that, on the, growing and sale of crops. And they really had their eyes on Canada and gaining Canada. And Canada at that time was owned by or under the control of Great Britain. So a lot of these war hawks really started to argue in Congress that we need to declare war. And they were kind of using impressment and Tecumseh's Confederacy as reasons why we should go into war, even though Canada was really their true motive. It was kind of like, I am very upset about Tecumseh and impressment, cough, cough, Canada, right? They really want to add new land. And that's kind of why we got into this war. Okay, so the main driving factor, in most historians' opinion, is that we wanted to add Canada. And it's no surprise that when the war begins in 1812, the main focus of the early war is the invasion of Canada. And in case you haven't looked at a map recently, that didn't go very well. Yeah, the United States is not able to complete a conquest of Canada and add Canada into the United States. It's kind of like a little bit of a middling the first 2 years, 1812, 1813, where the U.S. kind of gains some ground and then loses some ground, suffers a few embarrassments. A couple noteworthy things, though. They do actually invade York, which is now present-day Toronto, and burn down the Parliament building there. The United States does. Keep that in mind. They have some successes as far as naval battle, which is kind of surprising. On Lake Erie, they're able to conquer Lake Erie thanks to the efforts of Oliver Hazard Perry. Fantastic name, best name in the biz. Just look at those sideburns. And one of our most famous warships, the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides. That combination has a number of impressive victories on Lake Erie, and they conquer one of the Great Lakes. There's also the Battle of Thames, where Tecumseh passes away and dies, and I kind of discussed that more in my previous video on Tecumseh. So those are some of the early things that go on for the first 2 years of the war, but really nothing much to speak of. And in 1814, the war really takes a shift. Up until this point, Great Britain is still preoccupied overseas and fighting France. And it's in 1814 that the Napoleonic Wars come to an end. And now Great Britain can kind of focus their A-team, if you will, and bring them over to the United States to fight. And they're going to focus on blockading the entire East Coast and making sure that our businesses and our trade are greatly damaged, which they are very successful at. and B, they were going to begin a conquest of the East Coast. Now, where are they going to start? Well, present-day logic would tell us our capital, Washington, D.C., right? But surprisingly enough, in 1812, well, I should say in 1814, our leaders at the time really didn't think Washington, D.C. was much of a target. It was a really young city. It had only been really viable and operational for a couple of years. There wasn't a lot of business that was done in D.C. It was just a couple of buildings where politicians, argued. So they didn't think that was much of a target. Well, they guessed wrong because it was a huge target, and that's where Great Britain decides to pretty much go first. August 24th of 1814, the British are about 10 miles from the city of Washington, D.C., and there the United States puts up a defense at Bladensburg, where they're going to defend the capital, and there's some ragtag group of Virginia and Maryland militia that have been scurried together to defend the city, and this defense is an absolute embarrassment, disaster. Bladensburg becomes referred to as the Bladensburg Races because the United States forces were running away so fast from British forces that it appeared that they were racing each other. More British soldiers died of heat stroke from chasing us in that battle than actually fighting the United States. I know, ridiculous. Our defense of Washington, D.C. was worse than Gary Sanchez's defense of home plate, right? Like, it's pass ball. No, that's fine. Just take your time, right? We'll all just wait while you walk after the ball. Ridiculous. And I'm a Mets fan. I could care less. Walk after every ball. The defense of D.C. is an absolute disaster. Great Britain basically moonwalks into Washington, D.C. with no defense. They go to the Capitol, Congress building. They have a mock hearing. They say, all in favor of burning down the Capitol, please vote yay. And they all do. And then they go outside and burn down the Capitol. They go to the White House and they sit down and they have dinner there and they pour wine and toast to James Madison. And they actually go through James Madison's private love letters to Dolly Madison. Disrespect, as the kids say. And then they burn down the White House, too. A little side story that I'm sure a lot of people know. One of the last couple people inside Washington, D.C. During this mass evacuation before the British forces get there is Dolly Madison. And she refuses to leave the White House until the portrait of George Washington is secure. We sometimes think that she grabbed the picture herself and ran out of there, just on her own. But it wasn't quite like that. She had aides doing that. But to her credit, she refused to leave before that was secure. So that's a cool little side story there. Actually, the only thing that really keeps the British from burning down the entire town of Washington, D.C. is that same day a hurricane/tornado hits. And you got to remember, this is before weather.com, when you can kind of look at the 10-day forecast. Nobody really knew that this hurricane/tornado was going to hit D.C. that day. So the British are in the middle of burning down the city, 10 minutes after they just read James Madison's love letters. And all of a sudden they're like, whoa. You get carried away. And, actually more British soldiers died during that storm than fighting us. Go figure. Talk about instant karma, by the way. Yeah, that's what you get. Don't read another man's love letters because you're going to get sucked up by a tornado. That's just common sense. Okay. Where do they move on from there? So they burn down D.C., and this is a gut punch for the United States, right? The Great Britain literally just strutted in here, burned down our capital. Where do we go to next? Well, Great Britain's next target is actually kind of surprising. They were targeting the city of Baltimore. And Baltimore was a city. A lot of business was done there. But really the main reason that Great Britain is targeting Baltimore is due to just straight revenge. When they had set up a blockade in 1814 on the East Coast, Baltimore back then was a rough and rowdy, wild kind of place, home to a lot of pirates. And what these pirates would do is in the middle of the night, they would sail out to Great Britain's blockade. They would isolate a ship, go on, rob it, steal some valuables, and then retreat and go back to Baltimore. And Great Britain was getting really upset and tired of this. So they're like, we're going to go burn down Baltimore now, right? Well, their siege of Baltimore, if you will, takes place September 11th through September 14th in 1814, just a couple of weeks after Washington, D.C. And the main focus of the Battle of Baltimore is a siege on Fort McHenry. If you look at this map right here, you see that Fort McHenry is in a prime location to defend Baltimore. There is a thin little strip that leads boats into the inner harbor of Baltimore, where Fort McHenry kind of is. And if you don't take Fort McHenry, you're really not going to be able to move ships through that strip little piece of water there, because the cannons from Fort McHenry can kind of just blast away, sink the ships, and block it up. So Fort McHenry has to be taken if you're going to take the city of Baltimore. Well, September 13th to September 14th, there's a 25-hour-long bombardment of Fort McHenry, where British ships are basically just bombing and blasting away at the fort that has some American forces on the inside that are also trying to return fire and are returning fire. But for the most part, this is just a British, assault on the fort. And they hope that if they bombard it enough and for long enough, that fort will surrender, and then they can continue their conquest of Baltimore. Well, the fort holds out for 25 hours, like I said, over a day's worth of bombing. And very early in the morning of September 14th, 1814, Great Britain kind of decides to, abandon this plan of conquering Baltimore. They turn their ships around and they leave. And the siege of Baltimore becomes a crucial victory for the United States, if not for only a reason than to reboost morale after having our capital burned down. Cool little interesting side story is that a lawyer named Francis Scott Key was on a ship just a few miles away from Fort McHenry. He was in the middle of actually negotiating a prisoner release and watched this whole battle take place. And he was so inspired the next morning when he saw the flag, the American flag was still above Fort McHenry, that he decided to jot down a little poem that became called The Defense of Fort McHenry. And that little poem became the Star-Spangled Banner, which became our national anthem. And if I'm not going to sing the song for you here because nobody wants to hear that. But if you read the lyrics of the Star-Spangled Banner, the whole song is literally just about watching the flag above Fort McHenry during that whole nighttime bombardment. And, rockets, red glare, and bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. He's anxiously watching to see that the flag is still there, that the fort has not fallen, and that the city has not fallen. And the next morning, oh, say, can you see by dawn's early light? Thank God it's still there. We won. Really cool when you actually know the backstory of the song, what the song actually means. So yeah, now you know that. You can, learn all the words to the song, unlike Christina Aguilera, and hopefully you can sing it better than Jimmy Buffett. Sorry, Jimmy Buffett fans, saw that performance this past weekend. Horrendous. Okay, I'm sorry. I love Margaritaville, but come on, let's be real. He's got to do better. Anyways, as far as the meaning of the war, it's kind of a pointless war. Impressment actually ended before the war even started. No territory is going to switch hands. A lot of the things that were, set out to be settled before the war don't even get addressed during the peace treaty. And I'll actually talk about this more in an upcoming video when I highlight the Battle of New Orleans, which actually takes place after the War of 1812. But there you have it. There are some significant key crucial events during the War of 1812 that took place and are definitely noteworthy to say the least, even if the war as a whole, isn't particularly noteworthy. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, or subscribe. Any of that would be just fine. Remember that history is life. And in the words of George Washington, the surest basis for public happiness is knowledge. So go out there and get some. Have a good night, everybody.